morning. My name is Lisa, and today we are making chicken cordon bleu, which is an outstanding chicken casserole recipe that includes chicken, Swiss cheese, some wonderful sauce made of cream cheese, and a little paprika on the top. You're gonna love it. In order to help the casserole cook a little more quickly, we're gonna butterfly the chicken breast, which means cutting them in half. Once they're cut, we'll pound them out to make them thinner. Again, be very careful with this knife so that you're not hurting yourself, but you want the flat pieces of chicken. Okay, we're going to pound the chicken to make it a little bit flatter. So I've got some plastic wrap. I'm gonna get the chicken breast that I have cut in half, fold the plastic wrap back over the chicken, and we're gonna whack it with the mallet to pound it out. We're gonna spray the bottom with a little bit of spray, and we're gonna place the chicken breast in our casserole dish. All right, the next thing is to cube the ham. We have a ham slice that we're going to cut in small pieces, strips, and then we'll cut those strips into cubes to sprinkle over the casserole. You're going to want to sprinkle the ham slices, ham cubes, over the chicken, just as evenly as you can. All right, we're ready to add the third layer. The third layer is slices of Swiss cheese placed on top of the ham and chicken. Oh, there's a hole in that one, a great big hole. We may want to cover that one up a little bit. In fact, let's tear this guy in half. Cover up that great big hole. The sauce that we're going to make will spread over this Swiss cheese, bubble down into the ham and the chicken as it cooks. Okay, I've added a softened brick of cream cheese to the bowl. I'm going to add a splash of lemon juice, and I sort of eyeball this. And I will add some Dijon mustard, the equivalent of a good heaping teaspoon of Dijon mustard. We've got some melted butter, about 4 ounces of melted butter that we're going to add to the cream cheese mixture to help loosen it some and make it a little smoother. I'm going to use my hand mixer to begin blending this. To loosen this up, we're going to add some white wine. I've got a little bit of Pinot Grigio. You can use Chardonnay, or if you're not a wine drinker at all, you can use half and half, or you can use a little bit of chicken broth. Now we're going to smooth the mixture over the chicken, ham, Swiss cheese, and use all of this wonderful sauce that we've made. Smooth it over before we put it in the oven to bake. Our final layer is another layer of Swiss cheese. You see, I'm going to cover up some of these holes in the Swiss cheese. There's nothing wrong with holes in Swiss cheese, But let's just cover them up so that we've got a very flat surface. And to add a pinch of color, I'm going to take a little bit of paprika. I just took this out. Often the top is not browned enough and I'll put it under the broiler for a few minutes, but the top of this looks perfect, and I think the trick was adding the paprika before we put it in the oven.
I hope you enjoyed today's recipe. If you made it, let us know in the comment section below. We'll see you in the next video. Until then, let's keep cooking. Thanks for visiting Pope's Plates. Make sure you give this video a thumbs up. Click the notification bell so that you'll know when we have new videos available. And make sure you subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Until I see you again, let's get cooking. Foundation of my family. Hi there. Today on Pope's Plates, we are going to make a family favorite, balsamic chicken. So the chicken that I am cutting up was actually still kind of frozen when I started to cook. And so I cut it with a knife, kind of in some uniform shapes. I don't always do that. Most of the time it isn't frozen when I cook it, and so it doesn't have to saute as long, but we'll get to the sauteing part later. You're going to want to cut your chicken. You can also use pre-cooked chicken. You're just not going to want to put it into the dish until closer to the end, but we'll get to that part later. Now, this is a recipe that's pretty versatile, and so I usually, for 2 people, make 2 small chicken breasts or maybe a cup and a half of chicken. You can make however much you like. It's completely up to you. If you make more chicken, you're going to want to add more balsamic vinegar. I tend to, when I use cooked chicken, make a marinade of, I would say, half a cup of balsamic vinegar and 1/4 of a cup of olive oil. And I put it in a bag and let it sit while I am preparing the rest of the ingredients. There's obviously a better way to do this, and I'm not sure why I chose to do it this way. Usually I put my chicken into a cup and then put it into a larger Ziploc or storage bag. I don't know why I didn't do it this time. But what you're going to want to do is, once everything is combined, you're going to want to seal the bag, getting out as much air as you can, and then shake it a little bit so that each piece of chicken comes into contact with the marinade. Depending on how long it's going to take you to do everything else, you're probably going to want to put the chicken back on the refrigerator to marinate, because the onion does have to sweat for a while. So I would go ahead and do that. And then you're going to prepare your onion. You'll see that I'm using 1 medium red or purple onion. You can use whatever kind of onion that you like. I prefer red onions in really anything that I make for the most part. Just make sure that you use an onion that is kind of strongly flavored. And so you're going to want to avoid using a shallot, because this recipe doesn't have many ingredients and we want the onion to stand out. Because I have a cut on my finger, I am not using the best knife skills. Ironically, I have a cut on my finger because I was also not using the best knife skills earlier. Please be careful. Please do as I say and not as I do, and be really careful when you're cutting. Make sure that your fingers are pulled back better than mine were here. So you're going to chop and dice both halves of the onion. Now we're going to add, I would say, again, depending on your preference, maybe a cup and a half of sliced or largely diced button mushrooms, kind of, you're looking for a mild flavor. So button mushrooms, or I guess if you really love mushrooms, you could use something like a small portobello, but I like button mushrooms, white mushrooms. And like I said, you're going to either slice them or make a large dice. In a medium-sized saucepan over medium to medium-high heat, you're going to add about 1.5 tablespoons of olive oil. And then you're going to add the chicken that's been marinating in the balsamic vinegar and the olive oil. Once all of that is coated, then you're going to add your onions. This has absolutely nothing to do with the recipe, but notice my dog Charlie, who is just desperately hoping that we drop something or give him something. Onions are not safe for dogs. I'm not going to give him balsamic vinegar. We don't give him people food except for cucumbers, but I just wanted to point him out. He's so cute. Now, while the chicken and onion are cooking, we're going to bring some water to a boil. Now, you want to follow the package instructions on your egg noodles, because if you have wide or narrow, the cooking time is different and the amount of water that you're going to need is different. Make sure that you salt your water. One thing that Ina Garten says is to salt it so that your water tastes like the ocean. I don't think I put in that much salt, but it definitely adds to the flavor later. Once your chicken and onion is cooked, I would say about 3/4 of the way through, or your onions begin to be translucent but aren't quite translucent yet, you're going to add your mushrooms and your chopped garlic. Now, one thing that I don't love in this, but most of my family do, are sugar snap peas. I would also add them around this time. They don't take very long to cook, as the same with the mushrooms and the garlic. I'm not a huge fan of that, but it's prettier when you add them. Once your pasta has completely cooked and drained, you're going to add it back to the pan, either over really low or a warm pan that's not on, and you're going to add your butter. Now, this is one of the things that makes this dish fantastic, is that it has a lot of butter. It also makes it not very good for you. But you're going to add that in, and as a little hint, if your chicken and onions are taking a little longer to cook, if you cover it, it will make it cook a lot faster. At this point, you're going to want to add your chicken, onion, mushroom, and snap peas into your butter and egg noodles so that they combine well. And then, depending on how much you like balsamic vinegar, and I love balsamic vinegar, you want to add a little bit more. I added probably another half, maybe 1/4 of a cup. And I used to make fun of chefs for saying this all the time, and I'm not a chef, but I used to make fun of chefs for saying this all the time. But when they would say, use a good balsamic vinegar, I never thought it made a difference. And in some things, I don't think it makes a huge difference whether you spend a lot of money or get a really organic brand. But good balsamic vinegar is the key to this recipe. I use organic balsamic vinegar. As long as the thicker, the better. I just love balsamic vinegar. I like to top my balsamic chicken with shaved Parmesan cheese, add a little salt and pepper to taste. This is a great meal that goes a really long way.
Chicken casserole. This is something that our family has used for years when someone's ill. They call me and say, hey mom, can you come in and fix cream chicken casserole? We have approximately 1/2 cup of mayonnaise, 1 can of undiluted cream of chicken soup. You can also use cream of celery. I just happened to have the cream of chicken this morning. We need 1/2 teaspoon of salt and some grated onion. This is just a little bit, just to give a tiny bit of flavor. You can use as much as you like, or you can slice it if you would prefer. We like to grate it in. Additionally, you're going to put in thinly sliced celery. This gives it a little bit of crunch to the dish. This dish is not particularly colorful. It's very good, but it's not very colorful. So adding a little bit of celery makes a big difference to the way the dish actually looks when it's prepared. We also want to add a little bit of lemon zest. That's the bright yellow part of the lemon. You don't want to get into the white, which is the pith. That, unfortunately, is a little bit bitter and would alter the flavor significantly, so you don't want to do that. You also want approximately 1 tablespoon of lemon juice to add to the mix. Stir that, mix it well. And to this mixture, we're going to add chopped chicken. Now I've used rotisserie chicken, but you certainly can bake your own and then chop it or shred it. I choose to chop because it makes the bites just a little bit easier to manage. This will be approximately 2 cups of chicken. When it is completed, you add that to the mixture. And the final thing we will add is 2 cups of cooked rice. That cooked rice is in the process of being prepared right now. The final ingredient that we add is 2 heaping cups of white rice. Stir really well to combine to make sure that the rice is covered by all of the sauce. An additional addition that I put in, although this is certainly optional, is 1/2 cup of slivered almonds. It gives just an additional crunch to the casserole. If you don't like nuts, then absolutely don't add them. That is purely your choice. When it's combined, we're going to put the casserole into our baking dish. I've actually made a little bit more casserole than was necessary for our family, because I'm gonna have a little bit left over for myself. Before putting in the oven, you're gonna use about 1/2 cup per casserole, or a full cup, if you'd rather, of panko breadcrumbs. This will give the top of your casserole a little bit of a crunch when it's heated. You put it in a 350-degree Fahrenheit oven until the top is a bit crunchy and brown. Remember, this whole casserole is already pre-cooked, so you're just heating it through.
Tell us in the comment section below what your family go-to recipe is when you're not feeling good. Thanks for visiting Pope's.
A very favorite recipe called sausage tortellini soup. This is one of a series that we're going to do on soups. Coming the winter months, I think you're going to enjoy those. And I've got a story to tell you once I get started on the sausage. I have a pot on the stove. It's a big soup pot. And I'm going to turn the heat on medium high. Mine goes from 2 to 6. I'm going to put this about on 5 so that the bottom of the pot is hot when the sausage hits it. I need to take the casings off of the sausage. This is a mild Italian sausage, and I just sort of cut along the side of the sausage and then pull the sausage out of the casing. We definitely don't want casing in our soup. It's a little messy to do this, but it's important that you get all of the sausage out. And see, you have a little bitty piece of casing left over. Now that we've got the casings removed from all of the sausage links, I'm going to put them in the pan, break them up, and stay with them for a little bit while they are browning before I come back to finish the rest of the ingredients for this soup. Okay, I've got the sausage ready. We're going to put it in the pan. Ooh, can you hear that sizzling? That's what you want. The pan's hot enough so that the sausage is going to start cooking right away. Now I need to begin breaking this up. This soup was not part of our family recipes. This actually came from another friend. One of my traveling group, I've mentioned them before. We've traveled together every year for 20 years. And this is her comfort food, and it has now become our comfort food. It makes a lot, makes about 5 quarts of soup. So if you've got friends that you want to share with, I would suggest that you make the full recipe and share the soup. I'm going to leave this and let this cook a bit while I am chopping the onion and the carrots to go in the soup. Next step is getting our onions and carrots cooked so that we can get those in the pot, and they'll cook a little bit before we actually finish up putting the liquid ingredients in. We've got a large onion. I'm just going to throw the pieces over here on the board here. Got to get the extra skin off the outside of these onions. You'll notice that I've got an injury, so I'm having to move a little more slowly than I normally would, but that's okay. Alrighty. And again, be very careful. My knife skills are not professional by any means. We don't want anybody to get hurt, so be very careful when you're cutting the onions. These do not have to be cut up really small. You don't want huge chunks, but a good dice is fine. All right, I finished chopping the onions, and I'm going to turn around and stir this sausage to make sure it doesn't burn. That's looking good. We're going to now cut the carrots. And you'll notice that I have stick carrots rather than whole carrots. These happen to be on sale, so this is what I got. It doesn't really matter how many you use. I just am going to cut these in little cubes, and they'll cook pretty quickly in the soup. And I may add a few more sticks because I like the sweetness of the carrots in the soup. But normally you would put 4 to 5 good-sized carrots cut in discs. I think I will add just a few more. Now that we have got the onions and the carrots ready, I'm going to add them to the pot. Now the sausage is still cooking. That's okay. We want the carrots and the onions to have a chance to cook in this hot sausage grease before we add the liquid to the pot. So I'm going to stir a little bit here, finishing up getting the sausage broken up. You'll notice that I did not take any of the fat out of the pan. This sausage was not excessively fatty, but in the event that that does concern you, once you have cooked the soup, the fat will solidify on the top, and once it's refrigerated, and you can skim it off if you like. I'm continuing to break this up. There are a couple of chunks of sausage in here that are a little bit bigger than I would like, but it essentially is cooked. through. So I'm going to let this cook for a few minutes before I add the other liquid and the spice to the pot. It's time to add the liquid ingredients to the soup now. We've got 4 cups of beef broth from 1 container. The recipe calls for 6. I've got a little bit more in another container that I had in the freezer, so I'm going to add a little bit of that as well. That ought to be about right. Then we've got 2 cups of diced tomatoes. These are canned, but you can certainly use fresh tomatoes if you would like to. And we have 1 can of tomato sauce. To that, we're going to add that's a little over a tablespoon of basil and a little over a teaspoon of oregano. We're going to stir this. We're going to turn the heat down to simmer and let this cook for about 45 minutes or so. When it is almost complete, we're going to add the tortellini and the spinach, and that will finish our soup. The soup has been cooking now for about 45 minutes. The onions and the carrots are tender. We're going to now add the spinach and the tortellini. All right, I'm letting the spinach wilt. I didn't use a lot. I'm not a great big fan of spinach in this. You can use an entire package of spinach if you like it, and that thickens it a little bit, makes it a little heartier. And I've got the tortellini here. These are 3 cheese tortellini, but you can certainly use any other kind. We're going to add those to the pot, and hopefully we're not going to get hot liquid on us. You let these cook until they've risen to the top of the pot. That indicates that they're done, and then your soup is finished. All right, this has been a really good day to make soup. It's kind of cloudy and drizzly outside where we are. If you enjoy this soup, please let us know in the comments. And if you have a favorite recipe of your own, please let us know what that is. We'd love to make it. Until we see you again, let's keep cooking.
Thanks for visiting Pope's Plates. I really love ditalini pasta, and we're going to start with 8 cups of water, and we're going to heavily salt that water and bring it to a boil. That's the first thing we're going to do. Then we're going to remove the ends and the thin paper skin on 1 medium onion. I'm using a red onion. When I went to remove the skin, there was kind of a bad place in part of it, and so I ended up taking that off, but I didn't want to waste all that onion, so I set a little bit to the side. Now we're going to chop our onion into medium, actually pretty small pieces based on the size of the onion, because we're going to want it to saute completely through pretty quickly. This is a really flavor forward dish, but the onion is not the primary flavor, and so if you'd like to use shallots or white onions or even maybe sweet Vidalia onions, you can. This is completely up to you, but you're not really looking for a super strong onion flavor, so any kind of onions that you like are great for you to use. Now, the recipe calls for 1 chicken breast. I believe it says 1 medium chicken breast. Well, this is only half a chicken breast. It was gigantic. So just use as much as you think your family will like. And I tend to cut my chicken with scissors. It's just faster for me, easier for me, and I'm less likely to cut myself. And of course, clean hands before and after. Now I'm going to add about 2 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil, and mix it with 1/2 tablespoon to 1 tablespoon of salt and the same measurement of pepper. Hi, Editing Jennifer here. Please don't add a tablespoon. I meant to say teaspoon of salt and pepper. I like to mix it well before, just so I can make sure the balance is okay, and do as I say, not as I do. Don't stir it with a knife. I'm not sure what I was thinking. Sorry about that. But you're going to make sure that's mixed. We're going to add garlic later, and so don't be tempted to add garlic now. And you're going to put that olive oil into a medium sized skillet. You're going to add the onions, the chicken, and a can of corn. And you're going to saute that until the chicken is cooked through. Now, if I were to use corn on the cob, I would actually grill it first. And if you want some color on your corn, you can always scald it a little bit before you add it to this. You're going to stir that thoroughly while you're also going to add pasta, ditalini pasta, into your boiling water. And you're going to stir that and keep an eye on it so that it doesn't stick to the bottom. After your pasta has completed its cooking according to the package instructions, you're going to remove about 1/2 cup to 3/4 cup of pasta water and set that aside before you drain your pasta. Then I'm going to drain the pasta, and now I'm going to move the bigger pot, over the heat. So that's the drained pasta over the heat. And you may have noticed that I turned the heat down a little bit. You're going to want to put this on low. So you're going to add your pasta water back into the pasta, and then you're going to add about 2 tablespoons of garlic paste, or chopped up garlic, minced garlic really finely. You want to make sure that that's sort of mixing in a little bit because you don't want raw garlic. And I put that into the chicken just to heat up just a little bit. While I straighten up a little, I wanted to tell you that I use pasta water because the starch in the pasta water makes our solution loose without making it as loose as water. Now I'm going to add the chicken, the onion, the corn, and the garlic mixture from the skillet into the pasta. So I've added that into the pasta and the pasta water. Now it's time to add the really fun stuff, the stuff that makes this pasta dish not very good for you at all. It's very rich. It has fantastic flavor. So the first thing I'm going to add is about 1 cup of shredded Parmesan cheese. You can also use shaved. You don't want to use the really small Parmesan cheese. This is to taste. I end up usually adding a little bit more. And you're going to want to mix that in so just you don't have a big chunk of cheese. And I was just adding a little bit more cheese into the mixture. And continue to stir, because if you don't, you're going to bite into a really big piece of Parmesan cheese. And you're wanting to get it as melted as possible into that pasta water, because the next thing we're going to add is heavy cream. And we're going to want to add that a little bit at a time and mix it so that we know how thin we want the mixture. I think that may be all I need to use. Let me stir it up a little bit and come back. Okay, I think everything is going to work out well with that amount of heavy cream. The last thing I'm going to add at the stovetop is about 1.5 cups, 1 cup to 1.5 cups of ricotta cheese. Now, I've made this so much, I just sort of eyeball it. But if you want to measure, I would use 1 cup to 1.5 cups, maybe start with 1 cup. It's got a very bland flavor. I love it. I know there are some people who don't love the texture, so keep that in mind. But once it's mixed in, it doesn't have that gritty texture. All right, so now we're going to let that sort of sit on the stove on a very low simmer, and we're going to chop the toppings. I'm going to take about a stalk, maybe 15 leaves of basil, and I'm going to roll it up and chop it. I needed a different knife for this, and I didn't use it. You want to be very careful that your mat doesn't move like mine did. Again, use a sharp knife. It's definitely easier when you do. So you're just going to want to chop that, rough chop it, but pretty small, because you're going to put some in the mixture, and then you're going to use some to top the ditalini pasta. And if you love basil, use more basil. After you chop the basil, we're going to chop some cherry tomatoes. Now, I like to use the bright red kind. If you want to use heirloom tomatoes that have different color, absolutely do. I just kind of like the way the bright red stands out on the dish, because it can be a little bit monochromatic without adding those. So I'm going to want to chop maybe 10 or 15 cherry tomatoes, because again, a couple are going to be mixed in and the rest are going to be used for the topping of our ditalini pasta. All right, once those are ready, we're going to take our chopping block over to our ditalini pasta. Now, before we add anything, let's give it a stir. Make sure that the ricotta is mixed in well. Make sure that any remaining pieces of Parmesan are thoroughly melted into our pasta dish. And then we're going to add maybe half of the of the basil and the tomato to the pasta. You're going to want some for topping the dish. You don't want to add this too soon, because it's going to make the pasta, the heat from the pasta is going to make the basil turn brown. Anyway, so you're going to want to mix that in, and then we're about ready to serve. Now, I love putting this in a big, bright yellow dish. And you're going to serve yourself the pasta. Maybe 1 spoonful or 2 would make a good serving for your family. I'm going to take a picture of this, so I'm going to put a little bit more in. This is a fantastic dish to take to someone who's sick, or to have and freeze a lot of it. I tend to make a mess. I'm going to clean that up a little bit. But I tend to freeze this because it freezes beautifully, and it's a really hearty, fantastic dish, if a little bit complicated. If you make it, tend to make a mess. I'm going to clean that up a little bit. But I tend to freeze this because it freezes beautifully, and it's a really hearty, fantastic dish, if a little bit complicated. If you make it, let us know what you think in the comment section below. Thank you. See you soon. Thanks for visiting Pope's Plates.
I'm Lisa, and today we're continuing our series on soup. The soup today is Hungarian goulash. Now, actually, Hungarian goulash can be both a soup and a stew, depending upon how much liquid you use and how much beef or potatoes. Ours is a soup. The first thing we're going to do is to get the onions chopped and ready to go in the pot, and then I'll be cutting the stew beef into smaller pieces so that it cooks more quickly. I'm just going to put the trash pieces of onion over here on the board, get rid of them a little bit. These are pretty small onions, but I think enough for us to have for our soup today. The onions will actually do a little bit of cooking before we put the beef in the pot. That's why I'm cutting them up first. I'm moving the onions to the side so that I can cut the pieces of stew beef. They're already cubed, but if you see the size of the meat, it's a little big. So I want to cut this at least in half. Some of the bigger pieces I may cut in thirds, just to make sure that they're not too big, because while the soup will cook for an hour, maybe more, the smaller the pieces are, the more easily they are to tenderize as they cook. You'll notice that I'm cutting this meat on the same cutting board that I cut the onions on. I'm very careful to wash the cutting board off with antibacterial detergent to make sure that any residue of the meat is gone. I kind of scrub it with a little scrubber. I'm going to clean up my work surface here, and then we're going to start the onions in our pot. We're ready to start the onions. We're using 3 tablespoons of butter dropped into our pot, which is being heated. I'm going to let that butter melt before I add the onion. Shouldn't take too long to let this melt. It's already sizzling a little bit, so you don't want the butter to brown overly much. I'm going to go ahead and add the onions and let them start cooking. We're not adding the meat right now. Remember, we want the onions to cook a little bit before we add the meat. We will, however, add spices to the mix before the meat goes in and browns. To thicken the soup, we need to add a dusting of seasoned flour. And my seasoned flour is kept in a pot in my pantry all the time. It includes all-purpose flour, salt, pepper, and some sweet paprika. I'm going to take about 2 tablespoons of flour and kind of sprinkle it over the meat. And then to coat it, I'm going to use my fingers. Now, I'm still damaged here, so I think I'm just going to use my right hand. What you want is for each piece of meat to have a little bit of flour on it, so that as it cooks, it begins the process of thickening the sauce. We'll let the onions cook for a little bit longer before we add the meat. The onions have had a little bit of time to cook. Some of them are translucent. The bigger pieces are not quite there yet, but that's okay. Remember, this soup is going to cook for a long time. I'm adding the meat now that's been coated in the seasoned flour. To brown this appropriately, I'm going to turn the heat up just a little bit. You got a little bit more fire underneath. Beef has been browned on all sides. Now we're going to add the spices. We add a half teaspoon of salt. We add about 3/4 teaspoon of marjoram, which is a little unusual spice. And we're adding 2 tablespoons of paprika. Now I've used about a half a tablespoon of hot paprika because I like my soup a little spicier, and 1.5 tablespoons of sweet paprika. We're going to let this cook for just a minute. Let me show you what this looks like and how it has colored the soup. Cooking the paprika takes a little bit of the harshness of the flavor out. But you just let this cook for a minute or two. I think we're good. Now we're going to add 4 cups of beef broth to the soup. Blub, blub, blub. That make interesting noises. All right, we're going to stir this around. We're going to let it come to heat, not to a full boil. We're going to leave the heat right where it is until we see that it's beginning to bubble just a little bit. Then we're going to turn the heat to simmer and let it cook for an hour before we add the potatoes. This soup has been cooking now for close to an hour. We are going to add potatoes now. I used canned potatoes, 2 cans of diced potatoes. You can use fresh ones that you've peeled if you like. The canned potatoes really hold up beautifully, and they will absorb the flavor of the meat. These are small diced potatoes. Add them carefully so this doesn't jump up and bite you. Maybe a couple of them stuck there in the bottom. The potatoes are drained before I put them in the soup. Again, that all came out. The potatoes will stay in here for another maybe 15-20 minutes. That lets the flavors from the meat, the onions, and the paprika get into the potatoes. You do have a choice too here if you wanted to at the end to mash some of these potatoes, and that would give it a little bit more stewy technique, maybe texture, not technique, texture. I like it soupy, so I'm not going to do that, but we're going to let this come back to a boil. We'll let it sit on the stove, and when it's completely ready, we'll have a bite. Our soup is finished. It's been cooking for a good while. We've got really good chunks of meat and potato. You can see the onion. We're going to serve it into a bowl. Naturally made a mess, dropped it on the counter. I like to add just a dollop of sour cream to my soup. Makes it look pretty and makes it taste beautiful. Well, look for me. All right, I have served the soup, added a little dollop of sour cream, which is what I like best. If you like this recipe, please comment in the box below. We invite you to subscribe to our channel. We have others in the series of soup recipes that will be linked so that you can watch the sausage tortellini and the zucchini soup as well. Until we see you again, let's keep cooking.
Today we're going to be making a fantastic lemon dill baked salmon. Begin by preheating your oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. Let's begin by finely mincing 3 cloves of garlic. I know there are 4 cloves on the screen, but that is way too much garlic. I realized after I ate some of it, or I didn't mince it finely enough, but 3 cloves will be plenty. In fact, it might be easier to use a garlic press if you happen to have one. I didn't have one available at this moment. Now, let's take 2 small to medium size lemons. You're going to cut the ends off of both of them. Set those aside because we're going to juice them a little bit later. It doesn't give a whole lot of juice, but you really are not going to need a whole lot of juice. And then you're going to very thinly, or I guess thinly, slice both lemons. If you would like for there to be a little more color in your final salmon, you can also use limes, but no, it's going to change the flavor just a little bit, not a whole lot, but a little bit. Then you're going to take 2 pounds of skinless salmon, and you're going to put it on a foil lined baking sheet or sheet pan, and you're going to want to make sure there's extra on the sides because we're going to be making a sort of steaming pouch from the foil. Now we're going to drizzle about 2 teaspoons of olive oil over the top of the salmon, and 1 teaspoon of salt. I did not use 1 whole teaspoon because I really don't like salty foods, but most people will enjoy 1 teaspoon. And then 1/2 teaspoon of coarse ground pepper. And then you're going to put the 3 cloves of finely minced garlic over the salmon. This is one of those do as I say, not as I do instances, because this garlic is definitely not finely minced at all. Now we're going to put about 1 teaspoon of lemon juice, and that comes from juicing the ends of the lemons, just right over that. And then you're going to place the lemon slices on top of the flesh of the salmon. If you really enjoy salmon, what are some of the ways you best like it prepared? Of course, garlic, dill, and lemon are a go-to. I also really like honey balsamic glaze over salmon. Really, salmon is so fantastic with whatever you put it with. Now we're going to put some sprigs of fresh dill weed in between the sort of shingles of lemon on top of our salmon. And then you're going to wrap and seal the salmon tightly. That's why I like to use foil instead of parchment paper, because it's just easier to get a good seal. And then you're going to put it in the oven and bake it for 20 minutes. Another potential trick that you might use is to put another layer of foil over the top, especially if you didn't get the size measured completely, because you really don't want the steam escaping. Then you're going to once you're going to take the salmon out of the oven, and you're going to open the foil wrapping, and then you're going to set the oven to broil and put the salmon back in to caramelize the lemon slices. When you serve your salmon, put a few slices of fresh dill on the top just to brighten the dish up. I really hope you enjoyed this family favorite. Salmon is one of my favorite foods in the world. I hope you enjoyed it, and let us know in the comment section below if you tried it. Thanks for...
This morning, we're going to do Mississippi roast. Now, frankly, this is not a generational recipe from our generation. You can find this all over the internet, but that doesn't mean it's not good. And we cook it a lot in our family, and we'll prepare it multiple ways later. You'll see some of that. First thing we're going to do is take this beautiful chuck roast out of the packaging. It is really lovely. It's about 3.5, 4 pounds. Put it in the crock pot. On top of that, we're going to put 1/4 cup of butter. Now, some people use a little bit more, but 1/4 cup of butter should be plenty. And then we have 2 packages of mix. One is au jus, which is the gravy kind of mix, and you just sprinkle that over the roast and the butter. The second packet is Hidden Valley Ranch seasoning mix. We use 1 packet of that. If you have homemade ranch dressing mix, you can certainly use that. You would use about 4 tablespoons. I mentioned that we used ranch seasoning mix. That is a brand name. This is not a sponsored video, but we like that product. Then the last thing I'm adding is pepperoncini peppers. Some people add a lot of this, some add not very much or none at all. I like the spiciness that gives the meat. You can buy pre-jarred pepperoncini peppers and use as many as you want or as few as you want. We're going to cook this for 8 hours on high, and when it's done, we'll come back with the ideas for serving. The Mississippi roast is ready. It's been in the crock pot for almost 8 hours. Look, you can still see it's bubbling a little bit. It shreds beautifully. I'm going to let it cool and prepare it for our next meals. We're on day 2 of our Mississippi roast. If you remember, we put it in the crock pot along with the butter and the au jus and the ranch dip mix, and it cooked for about 8 hours. We prepare this multiple ways, but today we're doing it 2. We're going to fix sandwiches that we'll have for our lunch, and then we're going to fix some noodles and put the beef over the noodles. That will be good for our dinner tonight in case we want to have beef for both meals, or we can save it. So I'm going to put a little bit of mayonnaise and horseradish on these buns. We like to have that on our buns. The horseradish sauce is kind of low in the jar, so it may take a bit of popping to get it out. Oh, but that's good. That's good. Ooh, that was a bad sound. All right. We also like a little bit of cheese on our sandwich. I've got some cheese here. We'll sprinkle that on, and when the hot beef hits the cheese, it'll melt it a little bit for us. You can see this is pretty well shredded up. It's cooked for such a long time. It's so tender. And we're going to add the beef to our sandwich. Final thing we want to do is add a pickle. We like dill pickles on our sandwiches. So I'm going to add those. Put the top on. And our sandwiches are ready to go. Our noodles are cooked. We used bow tie pasta rather than egg noodles. I'm going to add a little bit of butter while they're still hot so that that can be melting in before we add our beef. Also, to add a little color, I'm going to put in some flaked parsley. Alrighty, now we want to add our beef. And I think I'm just going to use the fork to put this on. There is a little bit of grease in this beef, and we don't want that to get all in the noodles. Thank you for joining us for the balance of our preparation for the Mississippi roast. We've got 2 really good recipes now. Until next time, let's keep cooking. Pork chops and dirty rice. And we're going to do this in 2 steps. The first is to get the vegetables ready and to get the casserole ready. First, we're going to butter a casserole dish so that the rice, as it cooks, doesn't stick. Want to make sure that it's well buttered. We're going to put 1 cup of rice in the casserole dish. And over that rice, we're going to pour 1 can of consommé. And we'll want to add a little bit of water to this as well to make sure that you've got enough to cover the rice. The next thing we'll do is to cut up onion. Pretty thick chunks of onion. The onion is just going to go on top of the rice. Little bits and pieces of onion. And we're going to do the same thing to the green pepper. Making sure we don't get any seeds in there. I'll bop out the seeds. And again, these can be relatively chunky because they're going to cook pretty well as the rice is cooking. You're gonna preheat your oven to 350 degrees. And it will take this rice about 45 minutes, maybe a little bit longer to cook. You want it fluffy, and you may have to add more water. Just check it periodically and make sure that it's not dry. Cut off that rib a little bit. All right, I'm gonna add just a little bit of water to this. Even out the onions and the peppers. You're gonna put this in the 350-degree oven with a cover and let it cook. What you want in the pan, that shows it's hot enough to sear the pork chops. We're only going to sear on both sides, and then we're going to put them in the air fryer for approximately 12 to 13 minutes, and then test them to make sure that they're done. Yep, it won't do the fourth. As you can see, we only got 3 of the pork chops into the air fryer. We'll have to cook the 4th one separately.
We can edit out whatever.
Okay, you can see that we have taken the casserole out of the oven. We're leaving the pork chops in there to rest just a few minutes. But let me explain something. 50 or 60 years ago, when my mom originated this recipe, you had to cook pork for far longer than we do today. I think there was something about trichinosis, or they didn't want you to get sick. So we actually added the pork chops to the rice after we had cooked the pork chops, and just to allow them to let the flavors blend a little. So we'll take one of the pork chops out. You can see below is the rice, the onion, and the green pepper, all nicely cooked and fluffed. So we put a serving on the plate along with the pork chop.
Good. I can turn it off.
Thanks for visiting Pope's Place. Today we're going to be making my grandmother Adele's sweet and sour meatloaf. Before we begin, preheat an oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm going to begin by chopping the equivalent of one onion. I had a half of one and a half of the other. But you're going to chop those pretty finely, but they don't need to be very uniform. And you're going to saute them until they are tender. They do not have to be cooked all the way through because they'll be cooked in the oven as well. Set the onions aside to cool a little bit because since there will be egg in our meatloaf, we don't want the onions to be too hot because we don't want scrambled eggs in our meatloaf. Then we're going to use 1 to 1 1/4 pound of ground beef. I use 80/20, but use whatever fat content you like. Let's now add 1 egg and 4 tablespoons of onion soup mix. You can use the packaged kind, or I have a recipe that I'll link in the description box below for homemade onion soup mix. Now that our onions have cooled, we're going to add them into the ground beef mixture. I also sometimes will put green peppers in my meatloaf. I think it just depends on what I have at the time and what I'm really wanting to eat that day. Now for the binder. In addition to the egg, we're going to add 1/2 cup of seasoned breadcrumbs. I like to use panko breadcrumbs. My grandmother's recipe calls for saltine crackers, which I think is kind of fun. I don't do that, but you definitely could if you wanted to. Let's begin to mix our meatloaf together. This is not our final mix, but I just want to bring in some of the breadcrumbs to the meat and set it aside while we make the sweet and sour sauce that not only tops the meatloaf, but it goes in the meatloaf. Let's make our sweet and sour sauce. Actually, my grandmother's sweet and sour sauce. We're going to add 1 8-ounce can of tomato juice, and to that we're going to add 1/3 cup of brown sugar and 1/3 cup of white vinegar. The last ingredient in our sweet and sour sauce is 1 teaspoon of prepared yellow mustard. Once all of the ingredients of the sweet and sour sauce are put in the bowl, you're going to whisk it together really well. You may need to set it aside for a few minutes and let the brown sugar dissolve, but mixing it really well and quickly will probably get that done for you and you won't have to set it aside. I didn't show this. I'm not sure where this footage went, but I add 1/4 of the sweet and sour sauce, which is 1/4 cup, to the ground beef and mix it well, form it, and put it in a glass casserole dish. Let's go ahead and add an additional 1/4 cup sweet and sour sauce to the top of our meatloaf and put it in a 350-degree Fahrenheit oven for 1 hour. Or until the meatloaf reaches an internal temperature of 150 degrees Fahrenheit. I like to serve it with mashed potatoes and some green vegetable. I really hope you make this meatloaf and enjoy it. My grandmother loved this meatloaf, and so do I. Thanks for visiting Pope's Plate.
This morning I had plenty of time before a responsibility. So I got busy and cleaned out my refrigerator, and I realized that I had a number of things that needed to be used or they were going to go bad. So I am chopping some celery. I've got carrots and onions, and I went to the freezer and I had 3 containers of homemade chicken broth and a package of rotisserie chicken that I'm going to use to make some soup. Whoa. Yeah, again, I don't have very good knife skills, so you're just gonna have to forgive that. I sort of let things chomp all over the kitchen. I'm heating about 3 tablespoons of olive oil and maybe 4 tablespoons of butter. Butter gives flavor. Olive oil lets you have a little bit higher heating temperature without it smoking. And I'm gonna add the onion, the celery, and the carrots to the pot once they are all chopped so that they can cook a little bit before I add the chicken broth and the rice. This sort of cleans out my pantry drawer in the refrigerator and lets me begin to rebuild. And we're in Tennessee, and believe me, it's not going to be cool in Tennessee for at least another 2.5 or 3 months. But the temperature this morning was a little lower than normal, and that sort of brought to mind soup. And that prompted my decision to go ahead and plate clean the refrigerator out. The oil is ready, and I'm gonna start putting in the celery, the onions, and the carrots to let those saute for a bit. Additionally, to help them sweat, I'm gonna add about a teaspoon of salt, and I'll add a little bit of pepper at this point. That's just to enhance the seasoning a bit while they are cooking. This is over a medium-high heat. I will continue to stir until the vegetables have been cooked a bit. As the vegetables are cooking, I'm going to add some additional spices. I'm adding a teaspoon of dried basil, a little bit of garlic paste, maybe the equivalent of a teaspoon, not a lot, and this is about gone, so that's a good thing. I'm also going to add a half teaspoon of parsley, a half teaspoon of oregano, and a half teaspoon of dried mustard. And we'll stir that in as well. I'm also going to add at this point about 3/4 of a cup of white rice. We're going to let it brown a little bit as well before we add the chicken broth. The rice will cook in the chicken broth. Because the chicken is pre-cooked, I'm not going to add it until after the vegetables and the rice have been completely cooked through, and then I'll add the chicken. The rice has browned a little bit. The onions and celery are pretty well cooked. The carrots are not, but they'll heat up. We're going to add the chicken broth. And this is homemade chicken broth. I took it out of the freezer, defrosted it, and I'm going to add it. I can get the top off. Great day. Oh, there's still a little bit of ice in the middle. Oh well, that'll melt. There's another little piece of ice. And I'm only going to add half of this last container. I think that's enough. And we're going to let this cook. And the little balls of chicken broth can dissolve in the hot water as it cooks. Once the rice puffs up and I know that the vegetables are done, I'll add the chicken. Oh my goodness, look at this soup. I've added the chicken. I'm going to let the chicken sit in the broth and simmer for just a bit longer so that the flavors blend with the pieces of chicken. I can hardly wait to eat this. Let's keep cooking. Okay, today we have a Southern favorite, shrimp and grits. Now, if you don't think you like grits, you ought to try this one. Grits is just really mushed up cornbread. You just have to think of it that way. If you like cornbread, you're gonna like grits. I have started a pot of water, and I'm going to add 1 cup of steel-cut oats, grits rather, to the pot. I'm starting with 4 cups of water to make the grits, with a teaspoon of salt, a half teaspoon of pepper, and we're going to bring this to a boil before we add the grits. Okay, when you add this, you're going to have to add it slowly and stir at the same time. If you don't do that, the grits are going to get all blocked up together. But you don't want that. You want to have smooth grits. I'm adding a little bit of butter, about 3 or 4 tablespoons of butter. Makes it nice and rich. And when it is closer to done, I'm going to be adding a package of sharp cheddar cheese and just setting it off the heat while I prepare the shrimp. We're going to have to chop up a couple of things here. We're going to add bacon, which we have cooked already, so that it's ready to crumble in. We're going to slice a couple of scallions that will go into the shrimp when it's cooked. This has to be ready. You know, shrimp is persnickety. You cook it, and when it's ready, it is ready. You don't want to let it cook too long because it starts to get like leather. So we want to have everything ready to put in the pot as soon as the shrimp is done. We've got bacon, and I am putting the rest of the chipped up bacon in the bowl over here. I've got some jarred garlic. Now, I kind of like fresh garlic, to tell you the truth, but the jarred garlic is what I have. We're going to take the equivalent of about a teaspoon, and I'm just going to whack it in here with the scallions, and when it's time, we'll add this to the shrimp. I have preheated the skillet with the bacon grease that was left over, and I'm going to add the shrimp to the pot. Now please keep in mind, you do not want this to overcook. You keep an eye on it. You turn the shrimp when they begin to get slightly pink and opaque. This takes maybe 3 to 5 minutes, 3 minutes aside. And I'm not the best turner over with a spoon. I think I'm going to try a fork here. Okay, the shrimp are just about ready for us to add the scallions, the bacon, the garlic, and the lemon juice. A couple of more that need to get a little bit more color on them. They're going to cook for a few more minutes with the scallions and the bacon. Okay, scallions and garlic in. Pardon? There we go. All right, let's add
I've got it.
the bacon. Oh, this is going to be so good. So good. And we're going to add just a little bit of lemon juice. That perks up the flavor of the shrimp. Add a couple of tablespoons. I'm going to eyeball that. I can smell the garlic and the bacon. This is so pretty. It's going to be so good. Okay. This recipe was unknown to some of my friends who were born and raised in Pennsylvania. Maybe this is too much of a Southern dish, but they have come to absolutely love it. And one of the sisters is our shrimp cooker. Every time we fix shrimp and grits on one of our trips. We'll put all this together and be back for our photograph of the finished product.
Thanks for watching today. I'm going to ask you to do all the YouTubey things. Subscribe if you aren't already, using some leftovers from previous videos to make stir-fry udon noodles. Let's begin by making our stir-fry sauce. In a glass bowl or any medium bowl, combine 1 cup of water and 1/4 cup of soy sauce. We use low sodium soy sauce, but you can use any kind that you would like. And then add 3 tablespoons of brown sugar. To our stir-fry sauce, we're going to add 1/2 teaspoon ground pepper, 1/2 teaspoon celery salt, and 2 teaspoons of dried parsley flakes. And then we're going to add 1 teaspoon of ginger paste and 1 teaspoon of garlic paste. I use the thin and not the chunky, but you can use any kind of garlic paste that you would like. If you don't have ginger paste or garlic paste, you may use fresh ginger and garlic. You're going to want to grate them with a microplane because it needs to be grated very small so that people aren't biting into large chunks of ginger or large chunks of garlic. We added 2 tablespoons of cornstarch, and now we're going to whisk everything together really well and let the cornstarch dissolve. Finally, we're going to add 1 teaspoon of rice vinegar, and then we're going to whisk again to really mix up all of the ingredients. Then we're going to set aside our stir-fry sauce until we're ready to use it. The last video we shared on this channel, we made spoon salad. We've also recently made a pork loin. We're going to use the leftovers from both of those to make our stir-fry noodles. Let's begin by slicing 1/2 of a purple onion or a red onion into very thin slivers so that they cook evenly and quickly. My grandmother was born in 1910. She was definitely a Depression-era cook. And one of the things that she taught my mother and taught me is to use every single thing you have, which is why we utilize leftovers often to make our recipes. I had some leftover yellow bell pepper, and so we're going to cut that into julienne or stick shapes. If you want to use celery, if you have that left over, or carrots, really anything that you have left over, you can use. Remember, if you're going to use carrots, they are a more dense vegetable to cook, and so you're going to want to cut them a whole lot smaller than the other vegetables in your stir fry. Parts of a green onion or scallion, we're not going to get rid of the green parts. We're going to use those later. You can prep some of these ingredients beforehand, maybe the day before or when you're making another dish, but green onions or scallions don't hold up very well. And so you kind of want to make sure that you do those the day of. I'm going to take one zucchini. I did not peel it. Feel free to peel it if you would like. Cut it in half lengthwise and then cut those halves into small half moon shapes and add them to your glass bowl. Zucchini does cook rather quickly, so if you'd like it a little bit more crisp, you can set it aside and add it to your stir fry towards the end, but I don't mind if mine is mushy, so I went ahead and added it now. Now let's bring our green onions back. We've already used the white part in our stir fry, and we're going to chop the rest of these to be a topping once our stir fry is finished, and we're going to set those aside, and then we're going to bring in some leftover pork loin. You can obviously use fresh pork or chicken, really anything that you like, but we really wanted to utilize our leftovers. And so I used some pork loin that I had from a dish I had made previously. Since our protein is already cooked, we're not going to add that in at the beginning. We're going to set it aside because we don't want it to dry out. In a medium to medium high temp saucepan, I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of vegetable oil. Let's add our vegetables and we're going to stir them frequently until they become tender and translucent. Stir them frequently until they become tender and translucent. Do you and your family use leftovers and transform them into another dish? Or do you eat them? Or do sometimes, like me, they sort of go to waste in the refrigerator? If you make a new dish, let me know in the description box below what leftovers you use to make your new dishes. At this point, we're going to add our stir fry sauce. I added all of it, and I probably should have added about half of it, but this sauce is so fantastic. I didn't mind that it was a really wet, saucy stir fry, but if that's not something that you want, just cut it however you need to do that. And you're going to want to cook this until it is thickened by the cornstarch that we put in. And so just cook it until it is the consistency that you would like. I like mine pretty thick, and so I cooked it for a while. We're going to put 1 package of Japanese udon noodles into boiling water. It needs to be at a rolling boil, and cook those for about 6 minutes, or follow the instructions on the package, but you want them to be slightly al dente. Add your cooked noodles to a bowl and spoon over some of the stir fry mix, and then I'm going to top it with chow mein noodles, the green part of our green onions, and sesame seed. You can top it with whatever you like. If you made this dish and used leftovers you had at your house, please let us know in the comment section below. We'd love to hear some of your ideas. Thanks for visiting Pope's Play. Jennifer here. As you may be able to hear, I'm a little bit sick, and my mom and I usually record these videos together. I'm contagious. She agreed to do it herself. I think she did a great job. I'm hoping she'll do it more. So I hope you enjoy. Take it away, Mom. Just kidding. I'm doing the voiceover for this first part. You're going to combine 1/2 cup of chili powder with 1/4 cup onion powder. To that, you're going to add 1
tablespoon of paprika. I would not use sweet paprika, either regular paprika or smoked. 2 tablespoons ground cumin, and finally 1 tablespoon of sea salt. You can use a spoon or a whisk and mix the taco seasoning together well. If you're brave, you don't have to use a funnel. I'm not. I'm very messy. So I would use a funnel to put the taco seasoning into an airtight container. Here we're using a mason jar. You're going to seal it and shake it well before each use because sea salt may sink to the bottom a little bit, and store it in your pantry, any cool, dark place.
On a trip to Mexico some years ago, I had fish tacos for the first time. I've eaten tacos most of my life, but this was really an interesting, different flavor to me. My family and I enjoy shrimp, so I have taken some peeled and deveined shrimp, a little bit of olive oil, and some of our taco seasoning mix. Now, you certainly can use pre-prepared taco seasoning mix. We've included the recipe for ours in this video. You let this stand for about 30 minutes, and during that time for marinating, you can work on the side items for the tacos. While our shrimp are marinating, we're going to prepare the toppings. Really simple, very thinly sliced iceberg lettuce. And you'll see that the recipe that is posted in the comments below is for a much larger recipe than we are actually preparing. We're only making 4 tacos this afternoon, so we're not using quite as much as the full recipe would require. We have sliced 1 avocado. We're going to take the seed out. And do our best to get the flesh out of the avocados so that they can be sliced to go into our tacos. One thing about these is that you really do need to put some lime juice on them right away because they will turn brown in a hurry if you don't. Again, sliced avocados. With a drizzle of lime over the avocados to keep them from getting brown. Then we want to take, I've got a very large tomato here. We're going to only use half of this tomato. We're going to chop it pretty finely because you don't want gigantic chunks of tomato on your taco, cause them to fall apart, I expect. We've already put some sour cream, salsa, and cilantro into bowls that can be used when you serve the tacos, when everyone is preparing their own. We're actually using soft tacos and hard shell corn tacos. One of the final things we want to do is to add a little bit of cheese to our plate here, because cheese will go on tacos as well. And there's one more thing that we add that is a little bit unusual. Not everybody would like it, but we're going to show you how we fix that as well. One of the other things that we add to our tacos is roasted corn. Now, you'll see that I'm doing this over the gas flame on my stove. You want to be really careful. One, that you don't catch it on fire, and two, that you don't burn yourself. I certainly wouldn't let children do this. Once it's gotten a little bit of char on it, we will cut the kernels off the cob and add them to our taco. Cutting corn off the cob can be a little messy. It sort of goes all over the place. Suggestions have been made that you cut it actually in a bowl, but I figure I'll do this really quickly. And you're just sort of cutting off the top part, and you break these apart a little bit and put them in your bowl to add to the tacos. We're cooking our shrimp over medium-high heat, about 2 minutes per side. It's hard to tell when they're pink because they've got the taco seasoning mix on them, but about 2 minutes per side once they start sizzling.
Jennifer here again. One of the best things about this kind of taco bar is that you can add or remove anything you want. If you make this for your family, or if you plan on making this for your family, tell us in the comment section below what you would add to your taco bar that your family just loves. Thank you. See you soon. Thanks for visiting. And by preheating our oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. We're going to begin with one large peeled onion. Here I'm using a sweet Vidalia onion, but you can use a purple or red onion, whatever your taste is, or whatever you happen to have in the house. You're going to cut the onion in half, and then you're going to slice those halves into 1/2 inch to 1 inch wide slices. Now let's use yellow, orange, and red bell peppers and cut them into strips that are similar in size to your onion. My grandmother and I were similar cooks in a lot of ways, and my brother and mother are similar cooks in a lot of ways. One of the ways my grandmother and I are so similar is that when she cooked something, the kitchen looked like a disaster. There was stuff everywhere, and I am as bad, if not worse, when I cook. The kitchen is a disaster. You're going to add half of the total, or 1/2 tablespoon of fajita mix and olive oil to your vegetables, and I will link the recipe for the fajita mix in the description box below. Next, we have a couple of options because I prepared this next part different ways depending on what I have at home. But you're going to cut the equivalent of 1 chicken breast, or you can use that equivalent size of rotisserie shredded chicken, but there's a little bit different preparation at the end, and I'll tell you about that. But let's go ahead and chop up the chicken. There's a lot of silver skin in this one. I think that's what it's called in chicken. Maybe it's just fish. I don't know. Anyway, I would prefer to use a chicken breast, but I didn't have one at home. Once you have prepared your raw chicken, and the instructions are going to be a little bit different for rotisserie chicken, but once you've prepared your raw chicken, add it to the bowl, stir it well, and then add the remaining olive oil, and that's 1 tablespoon, and the remaining fajita mix, that's also 1 tablespoon, and remember that recipe is linked in the description box below. Then you're going to mix it well and leave it for 3 or 4 minutes just to let the fajita mix sort of stick to the vegetables and the chicken. We're going to put our entire mixture on a parchment-lined baking sheet and put it in the oven at 350 degrees for about 25 to 30 minutes. If you're going to use rotisserie chicken and it is already hot, you're just going to shred it and sprinkle it with fajita mix and serve it. If it isn't warm, go ahead and sprinkle it with fajita mix and put in the oven when you have about 10 minutes to go. I like to serve this with cheese, salsa, maybe some guacamole, a squeeze of lemon or lime, and some sour cream. It is so good and so easy. Thanks for visiting Pope's Plates. Make sure you give this video a thumbs up. Click the notification bell so that you'll know when we have new videos available. And make sure you subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Until I see you again, let's get cooking!